Napoleon Bonaparte. A fateful decision. Napoleon Bonaparte, a ruler of France, felt confident, one of the greatest military leaders on all time. He had conquered most of Europe by 1810. Many armies had been sent against him, but he'd beaten them one after another. He had created an empire in Europe, but that empire would not last. In 1812, Napoleon decided to invade Russia. Russia was trading with Great Britain, France's main enemy, and it was about to join forces with the British against the French. Napoleon thought he had no choice but to lead his huge army into Russia to prevent that alliance. Napoleon had little reason to doubt that he would conquer Russia. He was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. The rise of Napoleon. Napoleon was born in 1769 in Corsica, a French island in the Mediterranean Sea. His family was part of the Italian nobility. They had remained on Corsica after the French took over the island from the Italian Republic of Genoa the year before. Napoleon went to grade school in Corsica and then studied at two military schools in France. He graduated as an army lieutenant in 1785. In 1789, the people of France rose up in revolution against their king. The French Revolution ended a monarchy that had ruled France for centuries. The revolution was based on a number of ideas, including the brotherhood of all civilizations and freedom from unjust treatment by the government. People thought the revolution would make France a better country. Events took a terrible turn early in 1793. However, when the revolutionaries killed King Louis XVI, the king's death led to a terrible period called the Reign of Terror. During that time, Queen Mary Antoinette and many other powerful nobles were also put to death, so many people in the government were killed. That led to a lack of strong leadership in France. This situation created an opportunity for a man of ability to take control, and Napoleon began to do just that. In 1793, Napoleon was sent to fight British forces at the city of Toulon in southern France. Great Britain and other European nations wanted to end the revolution and bring back French monarchy. They were afraid the ideas of the revolution would spread, threatening their own kingdoms. Napoleon drove the British out of Toulon. Because of that victory, he became a general at the age of 24. Some people within France also wanted to bring back the democracy. When they led up with an uprising in Paris in 1795, Napoleon was called in to put it down. After crushing the rebellion, he was the head of France's army. In 1796, Napoleon married Josephine de Beauharnais, a widow with two children. Her first husband was a general who had been killed during the Reign of Terror. Napoleon was becoming known throughout France as a skilled military commander. He would soon be ready to take command of the entire nation. reaching the top. Napoleon continued to win many battles. In 1796, he was given command of French forces in Italy in order to drive Australian and Italian armies out of the country. Napoleon won a series of battles and claimed Italy for France. He returned to France a hero. 2 years later, in 1798, Napoleon led a small army into Egypt to stop Britain's trade with the Middle East. He won several battles in Egypt. But then, ships of Britain's navy defeated a French fleet in the Battle of the Nile. That loss put on hold Napoleon's plans to send his army across the Channel into England. By this time, Napoleon was becoming an unchallenged ruler in France. In 1799, he began First Council of the Republic with the powers of a dictator. In 1804, he crowned himself emperor. France, which has so recently gone through a painful revolution to rid itself of kings, was now to be ruled by an emperor, an expert administrator. Napoleon was just as good as running the country as he was at winning battles. He made the government more efficient, and created a national bank. He also worked to fix problems with France's economy, courts and systems of higher education. Historians consider Napoleon's greatest achievement within France to be Napoleonic Code. The code allowed complete freedom for religion, made it illegal for government officials to give favors to members of rich and powerful families, and required that government jobs be awarded strictly on merit. The code replaced a confusing jumble of laws and other rules made by various kings over many centuries. Napoleon ended the old system of the tax collection, which used private collectors. Those collectors got much of the tax money they gathered. Napoleon hired new tax collectors who were paid a salary to make sure the tax money was being used properly. Napoleon kept a close watch on the government spending each year. As a result of his changes, France had more than enough money to keep the government running. Europe at war. Napoleon wanted to build an empire in Europe under his rule, but the nations of Europe wanted no part of French domination. They opposed Napoleon with all their might. Over a period of 12 years, from 1803 to 1815, Napoleonic wars raged over Europe. Napoleon enlisted huge numbers of soldiers and devoted France's resources to waging war. His army, called the Great Army, eventually totaled about 680,000 men. French enemies formed a series of alliances aimed at ending Napoleon's ambitions, but he defeated them one after another. And his empire grew. As he conquered nations, he installed friends and relatives as the new rulers in order to turn them into allies. Napoleon tried to cut off the money that constantly flowed over to over the sea to British merchants. He forbade nations from continental Europe to trade with British. French ships blockaded ports all across Europe to enforce the ban. Napoleon achieved one of his greatest victories in December 1805 at the Battle of Austerlitz in an area that is now part of the Czech Republic. With 68,000 troops, he defeated a force of 98,000 Russian and Australians. In 1910, the French Empire reached its height with an addition of Holland and parts of what is now Germany. Napoleon was concerned that he had no heir. He divorced Josephine, and in 1810 he married an 18-year-old Archduchess Mary Louise of Australia. In 1811 she gave birth to a son, who was given the name Napoleon. Despite the marriage, Austria refused to become an ally of France. The end of Napoleon. In 1812, Napoleon made the greatest military blunder of his career when he invaded Russia. Russia repeatedly broke Napoleon's trade ban with Great Britain. The Russian Tsar Alexander I was about to join forces with Britain. Napoleon decided he had to act. On June 1812, he led an army of more than 600,000 men into Russia. Napoleon hoped to achieve a quick victory, but the Russian forces refused to stand and fight in a large battle. Instead, they withdrew before the French advance. Britain crouched behind them so the French soldiers would not be able to gather any food or supplies from the land. Finally, on September 7th, the Russian army fought the French near the town of Borodina. The losses were terrible. The Russians suffered about 45,000 casualties on the French, and the French 30,000. Napoleon pursued the Russian army deeper into the country. His army getting smaller and weaker from lack of supplies. He reached Moscow in mid-September, but found it was almost deserted. Much of the city was soon in flames from fires set by Russians. To make matters worse, Alexander ignored his presence in Moscow, refusing to fight in the decisive battle Napoleon craved. In mid-October, with little to eat and winter approaching, Napoleon had no choice but to head homeward. Russian forces constantly harassed the French army as withdrew. Only about 10,000 able-bodied soldiers made it back to France. The disaster in Russia marked the beginning of the end of Napoleon. An alliance of the nations surrounded Paris in 1814 and forced him to give up his throne. Napoleon was exiled to the Italian island of Elba. However, he escaped in early 1815 and raised a new army. Napoleon met his final death at the Battle of Waterloo in Belgium on June 18 against a mixed force of Australians, British, Persians, and Russians. With this defeat, the Napoleonic Wars finally came to a close. France's democracy was then restored for a time, though it will later be replaced with more representative form of government. Napoleon was exiled to the remote British island of St. Helena in South Atlantic Ocean. He lived the rest of his life there and died in 1821. His body was later returned to France and buried in Paris. Napoleon's legacy. Napoleon had a major influence on the later history of Europe. The ideas of civil code spread to many other nations, which based their legal systems on them. The code led to a modern era of European politics. Napoleon's legacy also included a new style of warfare, where all parts of the nation devoted themselves to supporting a war effort. His battle tactics and campaign strategies have since been studied at military schools around the world. His willingness to sacrifice lives and resources in pursuit of his ambition left France in shambles and a trail of destruction across much of Europe. Britain's Duke of Wellington, who led the Allied forces at Waterloo, was asked who he thought the greatest general of our time. He answered, "In this age, in past ages, in any age, Napoleon."